Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance. And this resistance video is a sponsored video sponsored by Bettyrose Woody. And Bettyrose wrote a novel, I'm assuming, about her life with her mother, a mother's love. She sent in a very nice contribution and asked me to give an honest review of her book. And that's what I'm going to do here. I haven't read a word of it. As I stated earlier, what I was planning on doing was reading the first chapter. I think I'm probably going to read the first two chapters as if it's a write-in contribution. Leave it at chapter 2. Read the rest of the book. Give my full review in a few weeks. Put the link to the book so you all can finish the book yourselves. There's going to be a link to Amazon, whether you can get it a hard copy or on the e-reader, either way. And you guys something we could all kind of do together and talk about it. So the name of her novel, her book is A Mother's Love by Bettyrose Woody. I don't know if she wanted me to read the dedication. So, chapter 1, Austell, Georgia. Fassad's hands were huge, bigger than most men's, certainly much bigger than mine. You noticed their size when he would reach out and shake a hand or pat someone on the back, which he often did. Fassad was nothing, if not charming, at least to strangers. His hands were what I noticed first when he put the pistol to his head. Oh, God. Let's get right into it, huh? It was difficult not to, because my own right hand was wrapped helplessly around the pistol inside his clenched fists. Fassad was a strong man given to unpredictable and sometimes violent rages. He would scream at me, at drivers who annoyed him, at neighbors who were too loud or who had violated rules known only to him. And that's the way the narc is, man. Rules known only to them. He had once thrown me against a wall for some perceived threat to his dignity, but mostly his outbursts were verbal. I had absorbed his countless diatribes more times than I could count, or at least cared to count. He once flipped over our dining room table and sent the remnants of our dinner plates and serving dishes and silverware crashing to the floor because a television commercial had somehow annoyed him. Emotionally unstable much, Fassad? Living with Fassad was like living with an unstable landmine that could go off with the slightest whisper if something didn't please him. And Fassad was often displeased. The odd thing about Fassad was that he had a softer side, an actual alluring and charming side. He was capable of kindness. In a way, I loved him, even after all his ferocious outbursts. That day I could almost understand his anger. American soldiers were in Iraq and had been for more than a week as Operation Desert Storm rolled on. Fassad was an Iraqi patriot, proud of his country, in love with Saddam Hussein. Wow, nice guy. Nice guy. I mean, I think the war in Iraq was a mistake, but to be in love with Saddam Hussein and living in, what is he living in this country for? I mean, that would be my question. What the hell is he doing in this country if he's in love with Saddam Hussein? And in your case, it seems like, or in Bettyrose's case, it seems like she's running up against both narcissism and cultural narcissism. He was familiar with the Iraqi oil fields now being blown apart on our television screen. As a younger man, he had worked in those same fields before coming to Houston to get his engineering degree. He loved being in America as well. He had quickly grown to appreciate Houston and school and all America offered. He had reaped many benefits from being over here, but the invasion had unhinged him, and I was once again trying very hard not to be the one to push him over the edge. Facade was charming, which, of course, might have been part of the problem with us. He was handsome and could be pleasant if the situation called for it. He could, with little effort, present himself in a way that would attract strangers to him, an especially useful and believing talent at the time when Iraqis were not being held in high regard. Look, I disagree with that. Here's why. Look, so George Bush, and George Bush was an idiot. He turned out to be a warmonger. Going into Iraq was the wrong thing to do. Okay, obviously the neocons wanted their war, and that's kind of what we're dealing with today. Okay, but Iraqis were not being mistreated in the United States. They were not. That I have to disagree with. In his mind, he might, because a narcissist always feels like they're persecuted. But people went out of their way after 9/11 to say, it's radical Islam, not Islam. It's, the Iraqi citizens are good. It's Saddam Hussein. It's bad. So this is like, to me, is probably perceived in his head that Iraqis weren't being treated well. Now, in a war zone's a war zone. And listen, the war, and I tell you, I was for the war when it went down. Okay, until the mask was revealed and you realize it was all bullshit. It was all for nothing. It was all to feed the military-industrial complex, and that doesn't excuse one thing Saddam Hussein did, because Saddam Hussein was a horrible freaking tyrant. And if Fassad's a fan of Saddam Hussein, I mean, that tells you what you need to know about Fassad. When we first met in Houston years before, where flag-waving patriotism and God bless America emotions ran higher than in other places in the country, he had somehow managed to avoid problems with his charm, jokes, and machismo. And Americans are pretty decent people. They're not looking to hate on. Your average American's not looking to hate on people. They're not. They enjoy it. They like it when somebody like an Iraqi or a Muslim or, is a normal person you can have a normal interaction with. I mean, that's what people are looking for. It's this perception that didn't exist in his own mind. This was Texas, after all, and Texans did not look kindly on people from other states, let alone from different countries. Texas walks to its own beat, but still, I think you're still misjudging a little bit. Yeah, they have a problem. What Texans want, and I think what most Southerners want, okay, when people move in, is that they're not going to change. They're not going to change the culture of the state, and that's been a problem. That's been a problem for decades in the South. That's why they don't like Northerners in general. Fassad had certainly charmed me. I had married him after all, but that was before his true and erratic, more dangerous side emerged. He had a way of raising his eyebrows in a quizzical delight that seemed to say, here is a charming man so full of life and humor. He was bright and energetic and knew what he wanted from life. When we married, the future seemed bright. Yeah, well, the narcissist's good side always, that's what they'll show you, they'll flash that good side at you. That's what you're always hoping to achieve. That's why they're able, because they have this good side, that's why they're able to abuse you so violently, so emotionally for such a long period of time, because guys like him can have this bright side they can flash that all you want is to get him back to that. But that bright side isn't real. That bright side never was real. The real facade is the miserable prick you're probably writing about. For me, after all I had been through as a girl and a young woman, a chance at love and brightness pulled me to Facade blindly. I see that now. The afternoon he decided to kill himself with my finger on the trigger, he had not slept for days. Wow. He sat, chain-smoking Marlboro Lights and running his hand through his hair. He was frantic as we both sat on the comfortable love seat in the den of our Georgia condo. The television had been locked on CNN, and Facade could not pull himself away as he watched with his arm draped over the couch. His tension grew as missiles dropped into his beloved homeland, and he slowly became unhinged. My own concern at the time was for the American soldiers, but Facade would have none of that. It angered him that I did not share his torment. "Curse you," he said each time I expressed even the slightest bit of sympathy for American soldiers. "These are my people being destroyed by you, the stupid Americans." I mean, he only had days earlier returned from visiting family in Iraq. His patriotic fervor reborn to the point where he began wearing a white thawb, the traditional ankle-length Iraqi tunic, wherever he went. It was certainly not a common sight in Georgia at the time. His lunacy seemed to grow as the invasion progressed. Facade had no qualms about thumbing his nose at Americans. My sympathy for the young American soldiers was eating away at whatever thin resolve remained. He could not understand that, and as the missiles rained down, his fragile emotions crumbled. Facade got up from the couch and began to pace. I should have fled then, of course, as he cursed the Americans and the invasion and smoked his Marlboros. I should have just gotten away from there as fast as I could, but I should have left him much earlier than that. We were incompatible, and yet we stayed together. Ours was a quizzical arrangement, to be sure. I made a lot of decisions like that, ones where people would say, stunned, but how could you? Why did you? Probably because of your past. I mean, there's something that drives you into a control freak like this, that you didn't see this coming. I'm still trying to figure that out. Over the years, I've begun to understand that in life, where love was always missing, you look for it constantly, even in the wrong places, right? And I would imagine, probably because of the title of the book, where the source of all this is. I mean, that has to be terrifying. I'm assuming Bettyrose has been narcissistically abused by her mother. I mean, I guess we can make that assumption from the title. And now you find yourself locked into the beginning of the Iraq War, married to an unstable, what you now are figuring out is a really unstable Iraqi, and trying to figure out, how did I get here? Because you're looking for love that you probably didn't get from her mother, in the charming guy, the flash of charm that you get overwhelmed by. That afternoon, I sat frozen in fear, unable to summon even the slightest ounce of common sense that would push me out the door and away from this crazy man so fixated on the television and the invasion of his homeland. Facade continued to ramble on about the stupid Americans and the glory of Iraq and Saddam, while I sank deeper into the couch. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, think about that. You married a guy who was pro-Saddam Hussein. I mean, that's even... I mean, before the second Iraq War, but we already had the first Iraq War where he went in and did what he did in Kuwait. Granted, a lot of the stories ended up being fake, like throwing babies out of incubators, okay? Fake CNN. And isn't it funny you're watching CNN, huh? The fake news headquarters. All this, he's getting riled up from watching CNN, fake news headquarters, the same CNN that told told the world Saddam Hussein soldiers went into Kuwaiti hospitals and threw babies out of incubators to have them die on the floor. CNN. And then that girl went and testified to Congress and all. That was all CNN did that. Fake news CNN. Actually, and it's kind of ironic because you're in Georgia, Bettyrose is in Georgia, CNN's in Georgia, and CNN got caught saying they were broadcasting live from Saudi Arabia in the first Iraq war, being bombarded, being bombed. It was a set in Georgia. So I think it's kind of ironic that Fassad is there, getting riled up, watching CNN for the second go around. So starved for love, you married a man singing the praises of a friggin' tyrant. The war was wrong, but Saddam Hussein was a horrific person. Horrific person. He paced and smoked. The tension was palpable, a fragile filament away from breaking into a full explosion. Fassad often did not need reasons for his explosions. His moods can rise and snap for no reason at all. That day, he actually had a reason, as crazy as it was. He had dark circles under his eyes from a lack of sleep and tight, jittery nerves from too many cigarettes and too much strong coffee. That afternoon, he decided he would die just as many of his fellow Iraqis were dying. And for the sins of the American invaders and my sympathy for the young soldiers, he would punish me as well. He reached into a coffee table drawer where he kept a loaded .38 revolver to protect himself against his various real and imagined enemies. When you do business as Fassad did, it was not an unrealistic thing to do. He pulled the gun from the drawer quickly and leaned into me on the couch. He swept aside the newspaper I had been scanning in an attempt to be invisible. He put the gun in my right hand, then wrapped both of his huge hands around mine and pulled it to his head. He then pushed me hard against the back of the couch and began forcing my finger onto the trigger. I struggled. Your fingerprints will be on the trigger when they find my body, he said. I'll be dead, but you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Well, if a narcissist is going to take themselves out, they're going to blame you for it. They'll die to see you go to prison. And I can guarantee you there's more to this with Fassad and probably his business. Sounds like he was taking the coward's way out. Sounds like there's more to this story, business related, and he was worried about. That's what it sounds like. But for one last narcissistic thrill, in many ways I had been in prison most of my life, locked tightly in a world with little light. It had been that way for as long as I could remember. But being locked up for life in an actual penitentiary was not in my plans. I was powerless as Fassad pressed me back against the couch and slowly moved our hands and gun to his forehead. I struggled but was unable to push him away or wrest his hands from mine. The doorbell rang. Fassad froze, even in an instant away from carrying out his impulsive suicide. His overriding instincts to appear as Prince Charming took control. He could kill himself and bring me down with him, but God forbid he should look bad in front of the neighbors. No, not only that. When it does happen, he could say, the neighbors say, I saw Fassad just 3 minutes earlier. He was happy, he was his normal self. Makes it easier to blame you if this is how he's planning to take himself out. He jumped from the couch and answered the door. It was our next-door neighbor, his hands gripping the collar of our Doberman. Charlie was loose, he told Fassad, and I wanted to get him before he got run over. I could see Fassad trying to control his rapid breathing, and he reached for the dog's collar. Thanks, man. I guess I should fix the lead in the backyard. Appreciate it. He closed the door and turned to me on the couch, still shaking. He walked into the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee. His anger somehow dissipated. I was saved. I stood from the couch, tentative, drained. Facade turned and stared. "Why are you always like this?" he said, trying to control himself. "Why are you always so tense and nervous? Why are you like a twitchy woman all the time? It makes me crazy." He walked to the window and pulled it open, breathing in deeply. How could I explain that? How could I try to show this stranger who was my husband, what I had been through? First, I thought I would have to tell him about St. Louis, and before I could tell him about St. Louis, I would have to try to explain my mother. Chapter 2, Escaping. There were always reactions, and the reactions were never good. No matter how well or how smoothly things were moving along, I startled easily, and my heart would race. Sudden noises ignited pure panic, and I'd shut down for no apparent reason and tune people out. I found that concentrating on anything useless. I could not lock my mind on anything for more than an instant. Today I would be quickly diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Find a counselor, people would say. Get help. Such things did not exist in the 1970s in Houston, Texas. I was on my own in that respect. Those startled reactions happened even when things were going well. And when I decided to pack up and move to Houston, things were going well. But it looked to me like there was no light in Houston then, a bit anyway, and I decided to move and let it in. Soon after I had said goodbye to Jose and headed west, I would be working like crazy, holding down 2 jobs. I would have 2 men who wanted to marry me. I would be back in school enjoying classes despite the frantic pace of life. I would have my own apartment and an exciting life in a city that was vibrant and alive. More than anything, I would be close to the kids, the younger brother and sister I adored, the biggest reason I was able to say goodbye to Jose. When I got to Houston, I barely had time to breathe because I was so absorbed in it all. Maybe that was what I was trying to do, keep so busy I had no spare time to look back. But no matter what was going on, no matter how busy I was, the urge to shut down was just a loud noise or an angry comment away. Houston would prove to be all the things a young woman on her own would want. It offered a chance at love, a chance to make some good money, a chance to expand horizons. It would take me far from the sordid and violent steps in the 7 Hills, away from Alton, away from Sailor Park, and Chokia. I hope I said that right. Houston at the beginning had promised to take me away from the madness. The drawback to it all, the one single thing that anyone would wonder about, was that move to Houston would bring me back to my mother's orbit, the root of it all, the reason I teetered so close to the edge. So, it is her mother, obviously. When I first got to Houston, I was on a winning streak. If I had time to take a breath and suppress the darkness, I might have enjoyed it more than I did. My mother was hoovering in Houston. You'd think that I would have put as much distance as possible between us, as much as I genuinely hated her. My mother had wanted me to surrender my sanity, as most of my siblings had by that time. My mother had predicted I would be an alcoholic or a drug addict or a whore. Instead, I grew into a hard-working young woman with suitors and a busy schedule. Yet somehow I ended up in Houston, living not too far from where she and Ed had settled. Odd, for sure, but that was her dark pull. Ed had tried to leave her, finally, but she convinced him to stay, and they moved to Houston. In many ways, that time in Houston was all a mirage, a superficial hint that I had not escaped my mother's brutality. In many ways, I could not escape the darkness of my past, and certainly not the damage. But I was about to give it my best shot. I was making a strong and determined effort to escape the world my mother had predicted, the world she had actually wanted for me. After you survive so many attempts to break you down, the only option is to rebuild. I've been rebuilding my whole life. I learned very young that at least trying to rebuild and reinvent and recreate was the only way I would have a life worth living. Before I picked up and moved to Houston, the day Elvis died, in fact, I had been doing well. Geez, I remember that day. My mother threw herself on the floor in hysterics. I talked about that. I remember the day Elvis died. I had a terrific job at the Missouri Athletic Club and had moved in with a man I loved, even though he was 31 years older and could and often did drink a fifth of scotch in a single day and still function. I loved Jose because he was a kind man. I had not been involved with kindness to any degree most of my life. Kindness was an appealing trait. I was, of course, jumpy and nervous working at the Missouri Athletic Club. I always was, no matter where I was. I could never at any time single out even a moment of something that resembled calmness. I was unsure how to act in public. And that's what they do. They did. I mean, this is the true description of somebody, a high functioning. Bettyrose was a high functioning survivor dealing with narcissism. And you get a lot of early excesses because you are so charged up, and then you just hit a wall. A few years in a place like Alton will do that to anyone, I guess. But I managed, even though my coworkers thought I was odd. I had even attracted the attention of a member of the club, a wealthy lawyer who asked me out to dinner. I went hesitantly, despite his handsomeness, worldliness, and easy ways. But the one date scared me. It had been nothing more than a normal date. But it was so odd to me with its normalcy, the dinner conversation, that it scared me. I never went out with the man again. That's like when I tell the story of when you're around a normal family. When I was around a normal family, I would get nervous because you couldn't handle being around it because you were. I tell the story again, my Aunt Barbara, the one who's still alive, told this story of how she was at her boyfriend's house at the time, this guy George, and it was a big dinner table, and somebody knocked over a glass, and everybody just laughed and cleaned it out, and she said for the rest of it, she was just waiting for the freak out. Because in our house and in our family, if you knocked over a glass, you might as well have burned down the house. So when you're around normalcy, you're like nervous when you're not seeing these narcissistic meltdowns, these narcissistic freakouts. The gift that keeps on giving. Jose worked as a waiter at an exclusive restaurant, Al's in St. Louis, and I soon moved in with him despite the age difference and his ability to drain a fifth of J&B almost every day. A phone call from Houston ended that short reverie with Jose. My sister and brother, Teresa and Stephen, were still with my mother, this time living with her and Ed. They sounded upbeat and made Houston sound like such a paradise that I forgot that hell was just around the corner. Anywhere near my mother and her influence was hell. I know that. I had lived there, and yet I still went, just for a short visit, I told myself. I was 19 when I left Jose for what I thought would be a brief and maybe even happy reunion with my brother and sister. Sounds like they're hoovering you back in. Sounds like brother and sister are trying to get mom's main target back in Houston, so their lives get a little better. I loved those two kids, and when they begged me not to go back to St. Louis, I could not resist. I would move to Houston, I decided, despite the fact that my mother was there, and despite the fact that I think I loved Jose and his kindness and what had been a happy partnership. When I told Jose of my decision, he was shaken. He had gone to the airport in St. Louis to pick me up the day I was supposed to return from my short visit. I was still in Houston. He called later asking me what had happened. I waited for you all night, Betty Boop, he had told me. I'm not coming back, I said to him. I heard him begin to cry. I wish you the best, he said. I still ask myself why I left Jose and why I would go anywhere within 1,000 miles of my mother. I don't know I don't question why I left Jose and his love and his kindness necessarily, but I do sometimes wonder why I would go back voluntarily into my mother's dark world. Jose's 31 years older than you and drinking a fifth of JB. At the end of the day, you want to believe somewhere deep down that your mother could be fixed. You still weren't totally convinced. There was something inside of you that wanted to believe that you can save this for your brothers and sisters, for her. Bettyrose hasn't brought up her natural father. And I'm questioning if maybe at that age, Jose was maybe a father replacement in a way. That was her mysterious attraction. No one could ever really leave my mother. She could always, without much effort, make people forget her violence, her threats, and her ugliness. No one was immune to her pull. Jose called me later in Houston and begged me to come back, but I never did. My mother knew I wanted her love more than any single thing. There you go. That's why you went back. She admired herself for sparking that desire in me. She knew I wanted her love and she enjoyed causing me pain. It was a volatile chemistry. She enjoyed it. It was a victory for her. And because you wanted her love so bad, you felt, I think probably subconsciously in your heart, deep down, you felt, if I show my mother I'm going to move from St. Louis to Houston, if I'm going to leave a man that truly cares about me to be with her, maybe that will prove to her and she'll love me. And she never will. She'll just take it and use it to her advantage. Because she says, like, I know I got her back right where I want her. I saw Jose briefly when I returned to St. Louis to pick up my car and a few of my belongings. He cried while I packed, but the pull of my mother was too strong. On the way back to Houston, I heard on the car radio that Elvis had died. Funny how things can lock in that memory. I remember that. I remember. It was weird. Weird you're writing to me because I remember that moment too. I remember it. I was 4. My mother threw herself on the floor of the plant room, crying. And it was the first time I went like, why are you crying over this guy? I remember standing over my mother as she's rolling on the floor of the plant room, which was this front room of their house, where it was just full of windows, just the sun beaming in, and she's crying. I remember looking down at her, I'm like, at that moment, I'm like, wow, she will never feel that way about me. She feels this way, and I knew Elvis was a fat loser then. Funny. I'm not sure we heard it at the same time of the day, but definitely the same day. Not saying the exact same. Could have been. Who knows? Who knows? Funny how things can lock into memory. If I hear an Elvis song even today, I am suddenly back in a motel room on the way to Houston and what I had hoped would be a new life. And I hear it, I see my mother on the floor every time I hear it. I was excited about the Houston I had seen on my short visit with the kids. It was flat and gorgeous to me, so different from St. Louis, Cincinnati, or any of the many places I had been dragged to. It was in the middle of the boom days of the oil business, and there seemed to be money everywhere. In Texas, people were not shy about flashing their money and their apparent success. Even the hot, muggy weather had a certain appeal. As I drove to Houston, I thought about the jobs I would get and about finally earning my high school diploma, a tough thing to get when you've spent years in a place like Alton. My mother had always mocked me for wanting an education, and she never hesitated to remind me I was too stupid to graduate from high school. She liked mocking me and telling me I was retarded, a ritual she enjoyed until the day she died. I'm glad you wrote a book. I went to Houston, and I did have those moments of brightness. I did almost escape my mother, but I was a moth drawn to her flame. Houston would be good. I would have my suitors, my education, my excitement. I would learn that I was not retarded, that in fact I was bright, adaptable, attractive, and talented. I would find all that in Houston. I would also be back in my mother's sphere and its darkness. That was her pull, and that was my problem. No matter how many steps I took toward the light, she could suck me back to the darkness. And those are the first 2 chapters of Bettyrose's book. It's very good. It's a very, very compelling story. If you wanna see how this story ends and continue on, the link to purchase Betty's book, the e-reader version or the hard copy in Amazon, is in the description box. Please buy one or the other. This is a very, very good book. And it's important for people to put it out there and put their stories out there like this. It's a very compelling story. I look forward to reading the rest of it. You know, Bettyrose ended up with a guy supportive of Saddam Hussein during the Iraq War, because basically she never got love from her mother, and she was looking for it in all the wrong places. So, thank you, Bettyrose, for the opportunity to review this. I look forward to reading the rest of it and then giving a full review in a few weeks of the entire book. Let me know what you think and Bettyrose know what you think in the comments section below as well, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution, Bettyrose, and writing the book. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions and reviews thus far in the comments section below. And again, be sure to click on the Amazon link to buy either the e-reader version, and you can see it's a very easy read. You can just read it right off your PC, or a hard copy version off of Amazon. And if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, or a Facebook live chat, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful. Because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you guys. Without you, all of this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. And be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been The Narcissistic Resistance Book Review Edition. Take care, everybody.